Hi everyone, and welcome to the final Newsagent podcast episode of 2022. I'm Susie Lysett, Content Manager at Goodlord, and this episode is a recording of our final webinar of the year, looking back at 2022 and covering lettings predictions for 2023. We were joined by a panel of experts: Peter Knight, founder of Property Academy, Greg Tsuman, Lettings Director at Martyn Gerrard, and Goodlord's CEO, William Reeve. Goodlord's Director of Insurance, Sherlock, moderated the conversation. So have a listen, and we'll be back with more episodes in the new year.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final Goodlord webinar of 2022. What a year it's been. Today's session is predicting the future. So take what you will from today's session, but hopefully, given the esteemed partners we've been joined by, there's going to be some very strong and accurate predictions. I'm joined today by William Reeve, Peter Knight, and Greg Tsuman, who will introduce themselves shortly. My name's Sherlock. I'm Director of Insurance here at Goodlord, and it's a pleasure to have you on board today. We're going to be covering a plethora of things, ranging from predictions around the reform bill to rental prices and everything in between. The Q&A is open from the first minute, so please don't hesitate to direct any questions at any of our panelists. I'll try and blend those into the webinar as we go, but if you've got a particular question for a particular panelist, please do note that on the question when you submit it. That'll be very helpful. As I say, I'll try and blend those in as we go, but we'll also hopefully have a bit of time at the end of the webinar to go back through the questions that we may have missed through the session. We're thankfully joined by Sarah as well, as per usual on the webinars, who's managing and directing the slides. If we have any technical problems, any sound problems, first of all, please shout at us in capital letters on the chat so we see it very quickly, and we'll try and rectify those as quickly as possible. Greg and I know too well about these technical gremlins on these kind of webinars, so they do happen. Before we go into the webinar, for people joining today who aren't aware who Goodlord are, we are a tenancy progression platform that aims to support your business, make you more efficient and expedite the lettings process, whilst also introducing revenue lines that can help improve your revenue per let, but also improve the level of service you can give to your customers, i.e. your tenants and landlords. If you want more information about Goodlord, then please do visit our website where you can book a demonstration and look at everything from rent collection to landlord terms of business, payments, tenancy creation, rent protection, tenancy services, and all bills included, a new addition to our services. Today isn't about Goodlord, as pretty much all of our Goodlord webinars aren't actually. That isn't kind of what we try and do. Today is really about looking into the future and predicting, hopefully, what we think the market has to throw at us. And as always, we're keen for your input from you as the attendees. So your thoughts are as always, more than welcome. But as I said earlier, we're joined by Peter, Greg, and William. Peter, good morning. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you, Ollie. Thank you very much indeed for having me this morning. And looking forward to getting lots of great questions, hopefully, and hope that we can answer some of the concerns and doubts I know that people have out there at the moment.
Well, indeed, and we're sticking our neck out here, Peter, because this is recorded, of course. So if we ever want to be proven correct or wrong, the attendees are going to have the ability to do that. So fair play to them. And Peter, for those who don't, and I struggle to believe anybody in the property industry doesn't know Mr. Peter Knight, given the circles you move in and the Property Academy. But could you explain very quickly sort of what your place in the industry is, Peter, and some of your experiences?
Yeah, well, thank you, Ollie. Yes, so I'm, as it says on the slide, I'm the founder of the Property Academy. Our business is principally working with estate and lettings agency leaders to help them to become better businesses and better business leaders, and that's really the core of what we do. We have sort of mastermind groups, I suppose they'd be referred to. We have about 100 or so members in those, and we also have a future leaders group comprising some of the younger people coming through, teaching them about leadership, so that preparing them for their future. And in addition to that, we run the EA Masters event, which is an annual event. Indeed, very fortunate to have Goodlord and Vouch support of that. And we also run the Best Estate Agent Guide, which is the only true whole of market assessment of every single estate and letting agent in the country. Where we assess their performance and publish the Best Estate Agent Guide, highlighting the very best agents in each region. So that's I suppose my background. I used to be an estate agent, Ollie. For many years, I ran an agency called Jackson Property Services, which we sold to the Halifax, and I became Group MD of Halifax for a short period. I'm no longer an estate agent, but I was one for many, many years, and my whole career has been based in estate agency.
A wealth of experience, and I'm sure of the hundreds and hundreds of letting agents joining today, there's definitely going to be crossover between some of the services and educational pieces that you deliver, Peter. But if you haven't seen any of those, I would implore you to search those out and look at, especially some of the content that the Property Academy put out there. I think we can all accept we're in a time where so much change is going on. Education is key, and I really do believe the Property Academy give great value and insight there to help direct businesses in the right direction. So thank you so much for joining today, Peter. Looking forward to hearing more from you shortly. We're also joined by Greg. Good morning, Greg. How are you today?
Good morning, Ollie. Thank you very much for having me. Yes, it's sunny outside, a little bit crisp, but I like this sort of weather. This is a second time I'm doing this prediction. First time last December, I had COVID without realizing it, and the recording, as you can probably tell, was affected by that somewhat.
I think you muddled through, and it appears that only I got the memo about the Christmas jumper. You're looking extremely dapper today, Greg. That email must not have got through to all three of you. So only me looking stupid here, which is no bad thing. Greg, you wear two hats. You're lettings director at Martyn Gerrard, but you're also influential through Property Mark, and you're moving into a new position, I think that's right in saying, in Property Mark in due course. Is that right?
That is correct. I am lettings director of Martyn Gerrard Estate Agents. We're North London award-winning leading independent agent. And I also, the second hat I wear is a president-elect of Arla Property Mark. It will be my presidential year next year. So let's hope my predictions are correct. Otherwise, I'm going to get a lot of stick.
Well, fantastic to have you on board, and congratulations on the presidency for next year in Property Mark. Property Mark is doing more and more across the industry, and I'm sure you'll only further that. So welcome aboard to today's session, and again, look forward to hearing more from you very shortly. We're also joined today by Goodlord CEO, Mr. William Reeve. Good morning, William.
Hello, Ollie. Good to see everybody. Thank you, Peter and Greg, for joining too.
And William, above and beyond being Goodlord CEO, your experience goes and spans across different industries as well, doesn't it? It's not just property that you've had sort of relevant experience in.
That's right, Ollie. I've really been in the technology industry all my career, but that spanned a bunch of different industries. I've been an investor in the property portal Zoopla, but I'm best known probably for my role in co-founding Love Film, which is my second business actually. But I've been involved in a whole bunch of technology businesses, generally from inception to their growth and exit, including Secret Escapes, Nutmeg, the business that became She Who Cannot Be Named, Alexa, and various others.
It's going to be really interesting to have your insights, I think, from a technological point of view as well, and understanding how letting agents can adapt alongside the change that they're facing with tech as well. And I know you're going to bring some of those expertise into today's session. So thank you to all three of you for joining. And today we want to initially, very quickly, just look backwards because it would be remiss to look forward without thinking what we thought this year was going to be. So we're going to take a quick look over 2022. We're going to talk about economic uncertainty, the cost of living crisis, because ultimately that is the major challenges that we're facing alongside the Renters Reform Bill, of course, which we'll be talking through predictions on that. We've also got a quick fire round, which I'm hoping the webinar technology has worked. And you should have seen, or for you all attendees, you should have seen a quick poll that flashed up for you to select. So we're not going to release that information first. I'm actually going to ask that. There we go. It is now flashed up. We're going to ask you guys as attendees first. We're not going to disclose the results of that. We're then going to ask the panelists at the end of the session. We're going to see whether we all agree. But let's get into it. Let's have a look backwards into 2022. We're nearly at the end of 2022. And it's fair to say that maybe the last 4 years, frankly, have thrown in some surprises. In terms of landlord volumes, I'm going to start with you, Greg, with your Martyn Gerrard hat on. What were your predictions, thinking back to the start of the year, around landlord volumes? Were you thinking actually this would be a year of growth following 2 years of challenge through COVID, or were you less optimistic?
In terms of landlord volumes, I think since 2016, we've been predicting that landlords would be exiting the market. The increase in legislation is a burden. And of course, during the pandemic, we saw some rent reductions, which contributed to a significant reduction of number of landlords in the marketplace. I think the fact that in 2020 to 2021, £14.3 billion was raised by the HMRC from landlords selling, which is a 42% increase on the year before that. So I think we need to look at that and see where this is going. Although there are some green shoots now, which we can certainly talk about in the near future. Demand has increased, rents were going up. The ratio of landlords went from the historic average of about 5-1 to 35-1 this summer, and it now stands at about 45-1, which is absolutely unprecedented.
So in terms of your business, Greg, looking back sort of 12 months almost, what did you think was going to be the biggest challenge of 2022?
The biggest challenge was always going to be attracting landlords, which I think we've done very, very successfully through various different strategies we've had, but also retaining the existing clients and reassuring them that although the Renters Reform Bill is coming in, it's not as bad as it seems. Don't believe everything the media publish. Think for yourself and listen to the experts. And I think that property market agents have been drumming on about it and have been doing a very, very good job.
Maybe if we either speak closer to the mic or a little louder, we're just getting a few points around the audio being a little quiet. Thank you to Jan and Gareth for raising that. Also, thank you to Paul for his love of my Spurs shirt in the background. Come on, you Spurs, Paul. Looking at that's going to infuriate William. Looking at this year, then, Greg, and so looking back at this year, you mentioned sort of attracting landlords. How hard has that been? You say you're successful, but that would suggest that there's been more work had to go into that, given your prediction at the start of the year. How difficult has that been, generally in the agents within your region, same property market, not so much Martyn Gerrard?
I think attracting landlords is difficult because there is a fewer number of them. Sorry, just before I continue, is the sound okay for everyone?
It's a little better, yeah. Could be a little louder, but I think we're okay.
Yeah. And of course, when more people are competing for the reducing number of landlords, then we're always going to struggle. So we need to be better than our competitors. We need to demonstrate our value, the benefits that we offer. And I think that there are many different strategies, and I'm not going to sort of go into too much detail as to what works and what doesn't work. But I think most agents who were committed to delivering a great customer service and keeping their landlords informed on the changing market have done quite well this year. Of course, the numbers are very, very different. We've seen a 72% drop of landlords compared to 2 years ago, for example. So, of course, there are some challenges.
And of course, no matter which office you're sat in today, the competition hasn't gone away. If anything, it's slightly risen. So, less opportunity, more competition makes for somewhat a tough market. It's very easy, looking backwards, to focus on the more negatives and the challenges, and even easier to look forwards and think, goodness me, how harder things are going to be. But Peter, as you alluded to in your introduction, you come across thousands, it's probably fair to say, of estate and letting agents across the country. If you were to pick a highlight of 2022, what do you think that would be?
Well, Ollie, every market makes a market. And the thing is, I don't think I've ever in 40 years known a marketplace where you go, well, it's the perfect market. There's always something going on. There's either issues relating to lack of stock, or there's too much stock, or rents are rising or rents are reducing, or legislation is changing, whatever. So every market makes a market. And I think whilst the national stats that Greg quotes are, cannot be ignored, ultimately a estate agency has always been a very, very localized business. And it's about how agents have applied themselves locally. And what I've been absolutely thrilled to see is so many of our members actually capitalizing on the inadequacies of so many other agents. This is a time, I think, where the best agents have been able to be not only to demonstrate their difference, but actually be of value with that difference because of all this change, because of all the issues that the potential changes of legislation throw up. So I think one of the highlights of this year is actually the value that can be attached to the higher quality agent. And my sense is that is going to continue very much through 23 and beyond.
And it's often true, isn't it, Peter, that in periods of stress, the cream does rise to the top because the smarter the businesses adapt and change, but also understand how they can present value. And we're going to talk a bit later on, actually, about the difference between cost and value and our predictions around that. But we're seeing that. We're seeing that also from an acquisition perspective. Have you been surprised at sort of the rate of growth of some of the larger organisations acquiring agents at the speed they have through 2022?
Absolutely, and again, we've seen this before, haven't we? I mean, I'm not suggesting that the current major acquirers are going to go down the same road that their predecessors did, but again, for the smaller independents, and my guess is that the majority of the audience here today on this webinar belong to that profile. It's a great opportunity because they're able to demonstrate a much more frequently, anyway, a much more personalised service, which ultimately is what typically landlords want, and tenants for that matter as well. So I do think that we've seen a lot of acquisitions go on. We've seen a lot of our members actually sell their businesses this year, but even more acquire rental books. And so whilst Greg's point about the reduction in overall landlords coming into the market is a really fair one, also there's quite a lot of agents getting out of the industry now, and there's been some great opportunities to make some really good acquisitions. So it's like all these things, Ollie. You can sing a tune that is negative, or you can see the opportunity that's there. Every market makes a market, and the key to that is you need to know the market you're in, and you also need to know the market that you're heading towards. And that, I think, is where agents need to understand that we are in a continuous period of change, and that this year is, I think, only the start of some of the challenges that we're going to be facing in 23, but they're big opportunities too.
And William, I promised to direct a more positive question at you as we go through the session. But initially, looking back on 2022, from a lettings or supplier perspective, what would your biggest frustration of the year be?
Well, I think for us, at least, Ollie, the biggest frustration is probably what's happened in the energy markets, where very, very quickly after the Ukraine invasion, the consumer energy market essentially just closed to business, and that's been very frustrating for those of us who've been really trying to help that industry become more efficient, find more customers, and it's totally understandable that the price cap regime is not fit for purpose, and it's left the energy retailers essentially being forced to supply people at a loss. So it's completely understandable they don't want any more customers, but it's at the same time, it's been very frustrating. It's a major part of our economy that's essentially been dysfunctional since March.
And indeed a major part of a lot of agencies' revenue lines, because as they've adopted more services to support tenants between that move process, clearly that's challenged that in some respects. So I'm sure there's many on the call that would share that frustration. I'm sure from an agent perspective and attendee perspective, you have many more frustrations over 2022, and hopefully your year has had more wins than losses. I think if you can come out the year thinking you've achieved that, you've probably had a good 22 on the balance of things, given how challenging some of the months have been. But looking forward, we do find ourselves at the end of this year, going to next year, with a challenging economic outlook. And actually, Peter, you do a piece of work, or you've done a piece of work alongside a colleague, I think you've known for some time now, within the Property Academy, around the economic climate moving forwards. And if we go to the next slide, please, Sarah. Move on. There we go. Yes, Roger and Martyn Fag. I think he's been proven to be a keen nose on these kind of things. He's got more things right than wrong, I think you were suggesting here, Pete. So keen to sort of understand your points alongside this in terms of what we're looking at from an economic perspective.
So Roger's a behavioural economist, and he has worked with us since our inception. In fact, I've worked with Roger for 25 years, and he's just been broadly right. I mean, as he says, he's often precisely wrong, but he's broadly right. And you know, he doesn't just call the economy, because he's a behavioural economist. He studies what underpins the economy, which is human behaviour. And he has called the last 3 general elections accurately. He's called likewise the American elections too. And you know, he forecast both the Trump and Biden victories months before the actual elections took place. So the guy's got really good form. And you know what Roger is basically saying, and in fact, all of our members have an exclusive webinar this afternoon with him. We bring Roger in every quarter and more frequently as events change. I think he's done about 10 for us this year, given all the changes that we've experienced. And Roger's view is basically this: if it hadn't have been for the, I've got to moderate my language, the truster flick, I think is perhaps a more appropriate term. If it hadn't been for the mini budget and what occurred, Roger was of the opinion that, you know, we may have had a small recession technically, but it was broadly okay and things were going well. And he was devastated actually by the consequence of that. But this is the summary here of what he's going to be talking to our members about, although he's going to go into a lot more detail about property later this afternoon. And as you can see there, he's saying that house price growth is going to be, he reckons, at 0%. And you know, he's fairly optimistic about where base and mortgage rates are going to end up. And I think people have got very short memories. You know, I've been, unfortunately, perhaps in this industry for longer than many. And if you go back, you know, for the last 50 years, the average mortgage rate for that period of time has been 7.6%. You know, we've just had this incredibly cheap period of finance. It was never going to last forever. And, you know, at the moment, if I look back on my career and you said to me, oh, you can get a mortgage for 5.5% fixed rate, you know, I'd go, fantastic. We can work with that. Absolutely. So, you know, you can see there an unemployment at 4.3%. The reality is at 5% unemployment, there's always, I'm afraid, large numbers of people who are just not employable, probably myself included within that statistic. But the thing is, 5% is regarded as being, if you like, full employment to all intents and purposes. So, you know, we've actually, we continue to have a labour shortage, actually. And one of the concerns I have going forward is people making short-term changes to their business model out of what they see as necessity, only to potentially regret, as they did after COVID, losing some really quality people, and then finding that they couldn't actually deal with any uptick in volumes that came. So I'm showing my cards here. Showing my cards. I'm optimistic about things, but then I tend to be anyway.
And a quick question from Gareth. Can you recall what period the fixed rate mortgage predictor is over? Is that 2, 5, or 10?
I don't know.
There's a reason for Gareth to tune in this afternoon. Then maybe Gareth, book the afternoon off, another webinar in store, and you'll get the answer. But we can follow up with that question maybe.
I'll be very happy to. If I had to guess, it would be a 5-year. It would probably be the 5-year rate, because that typically is what Roger would comment on. But I don't know for certain what that is. But I'll be very happy, Ollie, to share with you and with everybody else when Roger has shared his views later this afternoon. That
would be great. We'll follow up with you, Gareth, just to confirm. So you're feeling quite optimistic about things, Peter. But Greg, are you in the same boat? Are you looking forward to next year with the same sort of glasses on, or slightly different?
I answer that. Can I just test that the mic is working fine now?
That is better, I think. Yes.
Excellent. Right. So I'm also very optimistic. I think that house price growth of 0 needs to be put in context over the next 5-year period, where I'm almost certain that we will see significant house price growth. In terms of inflation, I'm a little bit less optimistic. I think inflation is here to stay. I cannot see how it can reduce to an average of 5% over the next 12 months. I think there are still significant pressures on rents going up, on energy prices, and food inflation hasn't been fully factored in, I don't believe. But I think the outlook is mainly positive. We need to work hard. Because no matter how good the market is or how bad the market is, we can make or break it. So if we put our minds to it, like we did during the pandemic, like we did during the Lehman Brothers crash, and many other difficult periods, I think there's a lot to look forward to in 2023.
And you suggest house price growth we will see some growth there. Is that potentially over-optimistic, given that we've gone through quite a big surge, and arguably what we're seeing now is maybe a correction more than anything else because the effects of COVID, albeit instigated by the interest rate change. What feeds that level of optimism that we will just see continued growth from a house price perspective? Well,
just to clarify, I think everybody is expecting a small correction. We've been talking about it for a while. Even some vendors are expecting it, which is positive. The market has been so hot over the last couple of years that we need to be realistic about how sustainable those levels of growth are. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to swing the pendulum in the opposite direction and have 20% price drops like some were predicting. Now, it's about being realistic. I think a stable house price growth of 0% is a very fair estimate. I think it may fluctuate a little bit, but I also think that it's important to filter out the intermittent noise. We don't monitor house price growth every day. Most of us don't look at it every month. We look at it when we want to sell. And if the price has gone up by the time we want to sell, then we're all happy.
I think we are seeing, as you suggest, the signs of a correction already. 2.1% fall in asking prices last month, according to Rightmove. And of course, that's asking prices. It's not telling actually what the house is selling for. And you would suggest that actually there's probably some room in that yet, in terms of the deals that are then done. But I think it's clear the interest rate change had a seismic effect, right, and a pretty immediate effect. Hard to see many other things. Sorry, I'm just going to sorry about that. Hard to see any other sort of event in the last couple of years that had such a seismic effect on house prices in that way. William, from your perspective, are you aligned with the two panelists here in terms of that level of optimism? Is there any other words of caution?
I think I'm not probably quite as optimistic as some of the others, just by temperament. But I think, to my mind, it's what happens to house prices is just a result of almost a tug of war between two effects. So one of the drivers is the earnings growth, income, salaries, wages, and whether they're 6%, whether they're closer to what the nurses are asking for, 17%, they're clearly rising. And house prices are always a function of salaries and wages and earnings. So that's pushing house prices up. And in the meantime, you've got interest rates shooting up. And again, Peter's right to flag that historically interest rates remain lower than the average. So, but clearly the house price growth in the last many years has been driven by cheaper debt and cheaper mortgages. So it's really a question of which of those two effects wins, and perhaps perhaps there's going to be a short term. One of them might win in the short term, and the other one wins in the longer term. And of course, overriding all of that is sentiment, which took a real knock during the moron budget, the mini budget, and but it does seem to have recovered a little bit since then.
And of course, all of these things we can see here predicting, they have a real effect on people. And actually, Hugh, who's joined us today, good morning, Hugh, says, hi there, really interesting stuff. It's very tough for a lot of people out there at the moment. But is your optimism genuine? I'm a single professional, having lived in London for 12 years, earning a good wage, but still struggling to actually buy in the city. I think it's fair to say across the panel, and indeed from a Goodlord perspective, we really recognise that. We see that through the tenant referencing we do. We understand the pressures on individuals, and actually it's about trying to support and educate the best we can to put people like letting agents in a position where they can empathise but also provide a high level of service. And I think it's worth noting it's very easy to forget how important and intrinsic letting agents actually are to that process, to that support mechanism to tenants, to really guide them to where maybe they should be looking on a property versus what they can afford, looking at the other costs that are attributed to a property. The best agents will go through that with you as a tenant. So Hugh, no, heard loud and clear, fully sympathise that it's extremely difficult for a lot of people. And what's somewhat unique about the times we're in is that it affects everybody in different ways. Albeit in certain cohorts dramatically. I think everybody's affected in somewhat by this, whether it's energy prices or indeed interest rate and inflation rises.
I think it's worth just adding, Ollie, that if you think about what's policymakers are trying to do, and the Bank of England is seen as the bank in the vanguard of trying to tackle the inflation. For however logical that is, I'm not quite sure, but that's its role in the economy, and it's pushing interest rates up. And the main effect of interest rates going up for most people is pushing the price of housing up, either because it pushes mortgage costs up, or because it kind of affects the yields that landlords are looking for. So either way, the way that the sort of anti-inflation policy is supposed to take effect is to make housing more expensive and to cramp people's style from all the additional expenses they can have on their housing. So whether that's a cost of ownership or cost of renting, absolutely, we should expect while the policymakers are trying to deal with inflation, that housing is more and more expensive.
And William wouldn't have seen, Hugh, your follow-up point, which was, especially now with rents at an all-time high. So you've read that piece well there. I think it's easy to look towards landlords and agents and suggest that they're central to the rapid rising in rents. But I think that's, as you've alluded to there, simply not true. There's some very much external forces there, which I think we're going to come on to actually somewhat in a moment in the session.
Just to jump on that, and I think it's a theme that's been repeated in the media many times. It's important to remember why the rents are going up, and it's important to remember why people are struggling to get on the housing ladder. The reason for this is the taxation policies that were introduced in 2016, where you're taxed on the rent rather than the profit you make. And for every £100 increase that the landlord has in mortgage costs, they have to increase the rent by £133 just to stay still. So if I have any advice to people struggling to get on a housing ladder, is to sign a petition that would review the reversal of that awful policy which punishes tenants and makes it much harder for them to save up for a deposit and get on the housing ladder.
And quite naturally, the government continue to miss the new house building numbers, which have now been are now advisory. I think far easier to remove a target you can't hit than figure out how to hit it. I would argue. I don't think those things are helpful either.
Ollie, it's a little bit like a letting negotiator who's not hitting their targets, turning around to their boss and saying, "Do you know what? I don't think targets work. Let's scrap them."
I was thinking it was my diet, actually. I'm still thinking making my weight objectives advisory rather than mandatory.
Well, I probably would during December, William, if I were you. Busy few weeks to come. Okay, so as you move through from looking more closely at the economy, if we can skip on 2 slides, please, Sarah. And we'll share these slides with you. Some of these slides are contextual that may be helpful actually to replay to maybe some of your staff in staff meetings, or indeed put as part of landlord packs. And again, hopefully this information and this content today is interesting. Please don't sit on it though. I'm really hoping personally that you take this out and you have these conversations with your landlords. There are very few agents will do. And the ones that do, I think will resonate back through. And ultimately, as a landlord, I think it's fair to say that most will need reassuring somewhat, whether it's going back to Greg's point around how difficult it is actually to really turn a margin in a challenging market and time, or indeed looking at your business and your business model equally as challenged. The last couple of years, frankly, have taught us to expect the unexpected. We've seen things like a Scottish rent freeze, the mini budget. I think it was called something else, but my mic my audio just went off when William said the word. And also potential new governments and governmental change. We could see many things like this moving forwards. I want to focus maybe on the rent freeze piece because Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, has been very vocal around wanting a rent freeze in London. Peter, what are your thoughts around rent freezes in general? We've obviously seen one in Scotland being enacted already, and there is noise. Although interested to know what you think the potential is of one coming to the City of London.
Well, it's one of those ironies that they're just, the government adjusts one thing in one area to try to sort one issue out, and then there's always consequences. And sometimes those consequences are hard to predict. But I mean, a rent freeze, we know what that's going to do, don't we? In terms of the reduction, in terms of the numbers of properties that will be available as landlords check out as a consequence. It's just absolutely ridiculous, quite frankly, to imagine that we're going to improve the situation by measures such as this. And I fear that if it was to gather momentum, I mean, Sadiq Khan has a position to to maintain. He has an election to win in X number of years' time. They're going to take these viewpoints on the side of the tenant. But what will happen, and has already happened, is a reduction in the numbers of properties that will be available to rent. And if you reduce the number available to rent, as Greg alluded to a moment ago, and he knows much better than I, supply and demand kicks in. So it's a complete nonsense, Ollie, in my opinion, and very dangerous.
And you talk about or you alluded to a conflict between, ultimately wanting to get voted back in and policy. Do you think that's symbolic maybe of more recent legislative and policy changes where the housing market especially has been used as a vote winner rather than actually looking at the core problems? And that's compounded the position as to where we are today?
Well, I think what we've seen, just look at the numbers of housing ministers that we've experienced. I mean, people talk about the numbers of prime ministers, but the whole situation with housing has been a complete joke for many a year now, and not just in the last year or two. It's been a revolving door that is spinning at a rate that is quite extraordinary. So there's been no joined up. There's no joined up thinking. There hasn't been for a long time. And you adjust something in one area. Help to Buy as an example, perhaps. What's the impact of that? It just pushes up the price of new homes. It's there's an absence of a coordinated approach, in my opinion, and this is where the opportunity comes into play. Because again, what you were saying, Ollie, was that the best agents will understand what the impact of these things are in their localities, and they will take the trouble to go out and properly communicate to people what they should be doing in this circumstance. They should be looking at their landlord portfolios, assessing what is right for each individual landlord, whether they've got a single property or they've got multi properties. They should be looking and helping tenants in that respect as well, many of whom potentially will go on to become landlords themselves in the future. So I just feel that we're in a situation which is, a lot of these things are probably not going to happen. But they plant a seed of doubt and fear into the marketplace, which is already nervous to begin with. And so the best agents really now need to, it takes time though. They can't just go out with a general statement or a newsletter and expect to be able to, address all of their customers' needs in one hit. They're going to have to go out and individually speak with all of their clients to find out their individual circumstances and work with them to come up with plans to mitigate these situations as best as they're able to. So I think that this is where the opportunity comes in. And of course, we'll no doubt come on to it. They've got to charge appropriately for that. And I think we're going to see a separation between the cheaper cut price agents who've managed to get away with it and the premium agents who genuinely are offering their clients quality advice, but they've got to charge for it. And I think this circumstance might allow for that.
And I want to return back to that point around the charging and the value that agents add, because we've got a note here on the slider in terms of revenue per let versus market share versus something else. Just before I do that, William, we've had a question from Paul. Good morning, Paul. I hope you're well. The rent prices are a product of supply and demand. Airbnb, etc., has taken a significant slice of properties from the residential home market. Do you think it is time there is significant action to have these properties brought back to the market, which I think is referring to taken from the Airbnb, for example, back into PRS? And will this adjust rents to deliver affordable homes and stop the need for rent freezes? What would be your thoughts, William, on that?
Yeah, look, it's difficult getting accurate data on this stuff, but certainly there seems to be a supply issue. And I think the point Greg made around the tax changes are just one of them. There's all the other regulations around it. For example, landlords needing to bring properties up to EPCC, and the changes that are going on just around landlord licensing and things like that are all leading certain landlords to just question whether they're in the right model or not. And if Airbnb's sort of popping up on their inbox suggesting sort of nice short-term fix for their woes, then you can understand why they might be tempted by it. Whether regulation is the right answer, or whether, to Greg's point, sort of some form of change in the tax regime is the right answer, or even, dare I say it, sort of grants towards things like fixing things like the environmental issues via grants rather than via diktats, is not really for me to say. But supply is the basic problem here, and a lot of the policies that have been coming out from the policymakers have been just deterring supply, restricting supply, encouraging landlords to look elsewhere for how to deploy their capital or how to use their assets. And that obviously has an impact on shortage of stock. I mean, the Scottish situation is really interesting because, of course, rent freezes are not new. I mean, Berlin's had them, New York's had them. So there's quite good data on how effectively they work, and it's really clear they don't work, or they might work for in a very, very short term period, but they store up enormous problems, and they create issues for mobility, they create issues for two-tier citizens, sort of them and us arrangements, and of course in Scotland it's taken almost no time for there to be real crises going on around. I think in Glasgow, the sort of university accommodation has been. I don't think crisis is a hyperbolic word. It's some really terrible dynamics going on there. So, and we're supposed to be in a market economy, and markets are usually quite good at fixing things, but of course they do need policymakers not to screw things up.
Yes, and it feels like there's less and less carrots and more sticks, to your point, in terms of incentivization. I think it's very
regulations at the end of the day are just sort of impede the market's ability to fix things, and they seem like, I suppose, a tempting move when you're in Whitehall, but they're leading to real distress out there.
And Angela suggests, good morning, Angela. She says, I think the issue of empty properties needs to be raised and laws around them need to be changed. So abandon empty properties which are causing a blight to the community. The LAs need more powers to take control of these properties and bring them back into use instead of wasting time imposing sanctions on landlords and reducing the market of rental properties. I think it's fair to say, Angela, nobody on this call or indeed attending this call likes to see empty properties, especially given how much stress there is across all different areas of the market. So I think you have probably 4 thumbs up there, Angela, to that point. Peter, going back to your point, I want to sort of bring Greg in on the point you made there around value. I'm personally a big believer in agents moving forward, especially focusing on revenue per let, especially with the threat of less growth and potentially doing less volume, and focusing on how they monetize and how they, each let and add levels of service to the provision they give to landlords. Firstly, into you, Greg. Do you think agents have the right balance here on revenue per let versus market share, or should they be focusing on something else going into 2023?
Yeah, Ollie, just before that, I mean, I've been thinking about the previous questions and Airbnb and the following comment about local authorities imposing. I think Airbnb, and forgive me for sort of going backwards, but Airbnb has clearly had an impact on it, and we saw that during the pandemic when all the Airbnb stock came back onto the market, and together with the reduced demand from less tourism, we saw rents drop by as much as 30%. In the prime central London area. So supply increases definitely affect prices. So that's a fact. Empty properties, I think getting local authorities involved in local authorities get involved in controlling supply is not going to be productive in the same way as further regulation may only deteriorate the levels of supply. So I think self-regulation is key. We live in a free market economy. Why would any property owner wish to keep the property empty if the taxation regime, if the regulation and the demand was there? Of course, they would be renting out. So we need to look at what's broken rather than try to impose further restrictions. So I just wanted to get that out there. With regard to what agents are doing, yes, of course, we need to demonstrate value, if I understood your question correctly. And how can we do that in the best possible way? We need to stand out from the crowd. All the agents to consumers seem the same. We all say the same things. We make the same promises. We're better than everybody else. But why are we? How do we demonstrate that? And more importantly, how is it important to the people that we're talking to? Don't try to push yourself and sort of explain what's important to you. Ask questions, understand what's important to them. And I think more and more landlords are concerned about the cost of living crisis and how that will affect the tenant's ability to pay their rent. I think rent and legal protection, which I'm sure we're going to touch on further down the line, is important. Rent controls, further regulation, all of that. How can we help them navigate that difficult market? Now, that's the key. We need to help. We need to be a part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And I think there are more and more agents who are getting better than we've ever been.
But is it not right to suggest that that over a longer period of time, agents have devalued their own services by crunching their fee down, struggling to stand by what they believe they should charge in an anticipation and desire just to grow their market share and grow volumes, and almost hoping things change over time. And actually, there needs to be a pivot at some stage in the near future where agents say, actually, no, I am worth 13, 14% versus my 10% I'm actually charging. I have to have better control than that, because at the moment, every deal that agents are doing below that line that really their value is at is potentially damaging over a longer period of time, is it not?
Absolutely. And I think what Peter said is bang on. There is a polarization of the types of agents out there. So you've got the cut price agents where they're racing to the bottom. I don't think that's a new phenomenon. That's always been the case. And we've got agents who are really standing out and charging appropriately, demonstrating value, and being chosen by a larger percentage of the market. There are more landlords choosing to instruct an agent to fully manage the property than ever before. They're recognizing the value and importance of an agent. But we also have to remember that we're dealing with people. Agents are people, and everybody has their sort of insecurities at times, sort of the fears of not hitting their targets, not getting the instructions levels that they need. So we need to educate the industry as a whole that what we do has value. What we do is essential to not just landlords, but also tenants. And whilst it may seem that they have infinite protection from the never-ending legislation that is there to level the playing field, as it were, I think some tenants are still quite vulnerable in how they are perceiving the lettings industry as a whole.
And personally, I think that's the great role of a letting agent, is to help educate tenants and really show value. Albeit, legislation has meant you can't charge for that service. I would maybe suggest it's naive to not focus on that, because there's a longer tail there of future tenants, future landlords, future vendors, future sellers, future buyers, etc. I think most agents are in this for the long game, and especially when you're building a brand and reputation. What strikes me, one of the major changes, of course, to our entire market was the portals, and that maybe removed the need to go back to the same person you last bought your house from. And I wonder if agents, do they focus enough on thinking, how do I get that reoccurring business? So they come to me first. That's a massive ask, though. I appreciate in theory that's great. In practice, that's a lot harder to do in reality.
Ollie, we've carried out a survey called the Home Moving Trends Survey for 15, I think it is, years now, and we get up to 30,000 people who are actively moving, taking part in it each year. And there are 3 or 4 key themes really that come in here. The first one is, as you've already said, it's very hard for people who transact relatively infrequently to be able to differentiate between one agent and another. Agents would have more standout if they said, I'm number 2 in my area rather than number 1, quite frankly, in some instances, because every agent is claiming to be the best, right? And what's the substantiation for that? And of course, whether you are a landlord or a seller, you're only going to find out whether your agent's any good after the event, because they're all going to promise you that you are. So, it's one of the reasons why we set up the Best Estate Agent Guide, was to provide a useful reference point. So the first thing is that consumers tend to look at agents as all being the same. The second thing is that the fees on both sale and rental have all been in a downward movement, right? And and at the same time, you could argue that could be offset perhaps to a degree by increases in both property values and rents, but I'm afraid costs have also been going up substantially as well. And the problem that we all face, actually, more than that, is transaction numbers. That's what drives the estate agency. It's not just a 5% increase or decrease, for that matter, in rents or in prices. It's not. It has an impact, but nothing compared to the reduction in transaction numbers. And what we're seeing at the moment is we've had 2 years of completely unparalleled, not unparalleled, but we've had a massive spike in terms of the numbers of transactions. and they've fallen back on the sales side to where they used to be. But in that 2 years where it's been absolutely 20% or more higher, I'm afraid a lot of agents have geared themselves up in terms of their own personal finances and spending as well, that is the normal. It's not the normal. It was just a spike in terms of activity, and it's come back down again. So our surveys show that actually people are paying less. And one of the attendees has just asked a question about typical rents. I'd be happy to answer that separately because it does vary hugely from one region to another. And it also varies significantly from property values one to another. But the very best agents, one of our members is Paramount, Spencer Lawrence. Many of you will have seen, and what they're managing to do with their landlords is, and for that matter, they call tenants residents. They've changed the language, which I think is really interesting and helpful. And what they're now looking at is averages of 4-year tenancies, where they're doing improvements during the tenancy, where the properties are being maintained, and not just maintained, improved whilst the tenant is in situ. When the tenants are away on holiday, they'll go in and change the carpets, or they'll refit the kitchen, or they'll change the bathrooms. And they're working collaboratively. And the consequence of this is that they're actually managing, they're properly asset managing. And they're charging very, very healthy fees as a consequence. And it's an example for others to follow. But if you're just going to look to be the cookie cutter approach, just get them on the market, stick them on the portals, get any tenant in that you can find that ticks a sufficient number of boxes. It's just not good enough, and it's not sustainable, and you will not be able to charge appropriate fees, which is why so many of those agents are now getting out and selling up to those bigger organisations, who in turn, I think, are potentially stacking themselves up for massive challenges going forwards.
And in terms of changing your business model, it's great to see businesses adapt and change. But of course, that can be sideswiped by other changes like reform. So when you're looking for longer tenancies, and of course, then the government comes along and says, hey, actually, no fixed term tenancies. We're going to periodic. We're going to talk about that shortly. But I think taking that different approach and looking outside the box and trying to service both tenant and landlord in equal measure, and try and provide consistency and longevity is definitely key. It's clear from this conversation that the market continues to need support, and there is many fantastic suppliers across the market who try and do a range of things. William, what role do suppliers play over the next 12 months in supporting letting agency businesses? Do you think that's different than maybe the previous couple of years, or is it more of the same?
I think it's certainly. I'm certainly hoping it's a little bit different from the 2 years ago, Ollie, when we were all learning how to spell furlough and frantically trying to work out which way was up. And I think a world of inflation is a sort of different place to be than the whole lockdown era that we've just come out of. But I think one of the changes that's on our mind, the team here at Goodlord, is we're seeing a significant increase in attempted fraud, as presumably to do with the cost of living stresses, and certainly I think those of us on the front line of that, we've got a real role to play here, and especially those of us who've got who've got scale and got wide, diverse exposure to the market, where we're seeing examples where the sort of same people are operating in different agencies, different locations, but using similar techniques. So I think that's a relatively new thing that probably is going to be at the forefront in 2023 to a level it really wasn't in the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think we've seen the change through COVID of agency being switched more onto digital transformation. Arguably, there's still steps to go with that across the whole market. But I think suppliers play a key role, and it's easy to see that as a transactional partnership. And I would urge you to ask more of us, ask more of your existing suppliers if you don't use Goodlord. We're here to help, and it should be a partnership that takes on the challenges we're talking about and we're about to talk about. Because one of the other things that's coming down the tracks in 2023, whether we like it or not, I think unfortunately, is the Renters Reform Bill. The government have now committed a couple of times to delivering this. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Sarah. The end of Section 21 has had a lot of noise, and I'm going to put to the panel that that's a red herring. That doesn't affect you as a business today. It might affect how you conduct yourselves. It might affect how you manage processes. Actually, if you use a supply for a lot of these things and you have the relevant protection, arguably it doesn't affect you as much or your landlord as much anywhere near as some of the noise would have. I'm going to suggest to the panel that the biggest change being suggested in the reform is the change to periodic tenancies. Greg, when we look at the change and the effect of that change, do you think most letting agents going into 2023 are ahead of this? Because essentially the move to periodic letting strips out the renewal process, which is an area where many agents, if not all, will monetize. What's your sort of take on this, looking out to the rest of the market and some of the agents that you speak to frequently?
I've been doing this for 2 decades now. The market has never stayed the same. There are always challenges. And when we refer to something as a renewal process, or a renewal fee for that matter, having spoken to many other agents in the industry, everybody has a different term for it. So some refer to a renewal fee as a £60 they charge for sending out a templated contract. Others provide a full service. Now, with more agents offering a full management service or a part management service where fees are collected monthly, I think sort of isolating one aspect of a job, i.e. sending out a tenancy agreement, is wrong, because there is so much more that we do. We review rents, we provide comparable evidence, we negotiate with tenants. When you look at commercial property and the rent reviews that are being charged for very, very healthily, what is the difference between what we do and what happens there? I think we will need to improve the standard of the rent review process that we do, because if the tenant can challenge it through a first-tier tribunal and the landlord cannot serve a Section 21 notice, then further education is needed on how to handle a Section 13 rent increase notice, and various others. So I think things are changing. We need to adapt. We need to plan. We need to start planning now, because although I don't predict the changes to become effective for another 12 months or thereabouts, at least, that period of time will pass us by very, very quickly, as we saw with the tenant fees ban, where we saw so many agents being unprepared and just scrambling with the last sort of couple of months' notice. Admittedly, we had the pandemic. And any other legislation, I think we need to plan, we need to think ahead rather than be reactive.
Greg makes a great point there, Ollie. You know, I mean, we've been here before, right? It's same meat, different gravy. We were here with the whole tenant fee ban, and there's two things that came out of that, really, I think, fundamentally. The first is that actually the Armageddon scenario that so many people were painting was proven to be untrue, and actually, although a lot of agents left it late, what they were all able to do was to increase charges to their landlords, and or to reduce their cost base, or to find other income streams that would offset. But the fact of the matter is that you know we've been down this road. And Greg's point is this: if you get ahead of the game, so if you know this is going to be down the track, and we have got plenty of notice on this, then you've got plenty of time. And this is where I think it's individually, again, back to this individual relationship with each landlord, to say, look, this is coming up. You know, what are we going to do about this for all of our benefits, for your existing tenants, for you as the landlord, and for us as agents? How are we going to approach this? And so my sense is that, again, the best agents are going to be mitigating this. And it won't be the Armageddon scenario that people are painting to be for the majority. You know, it will be for some. There's always going to be people who are impacted one way or another. But, you know, for the majority of good quality agents, they've been down this road. Get ahead of the game, speak to your landlords, and make a point of having a plan in place for each one individually as to how you're going to transition this. And you know, the problem, the magnitude of the problem will diminish hugely. Control the controllables.
Yes, indeed. And I think a lot of this is perspective and action. And if you've got one thing on your to-do list when you return from Christmas to the agents that have joined us today, I would suggest it, if you haven't done this already, is at least start the assessment on the impact of the change to periodic lettings. And question the perspective as well in terms of how you view a landlord and the relationship with the landlord. At the moment, it's tenancy-based. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be yearly based. You're managing their property. You're managing their biggest asset. And I think focusing on that away from the terms of a tenancy may well prove productive in terms of how you can get a charging model that isn't consistently around what is now going to be a very flexible termed agreement. But I think it's fair to say, Greg, is it not, that this doesn't change tenure? This doesn't change tenants being less transient. The market actually doesn't change.
And I was going to make another point using Goodlord as an analogy. We offer rent and legal protection to the vast majority of our clients because, as William said, there are new challenges that we're facing with regard to the cost of living crisis and tenants struggling to secure tenancy. So obviously that's where we rely on a third-party referencing company. But more importantly, it needs to be backed up by rent and legal protection because when things go wrong, you don't want it to go terribly wrong. You charge per property rather than per tenancy, whereas 10 years ago, the standard was per tenancy. Now, why is that? It's because the landlord is in it for the long haul. Just because you may need to find another tenant during the period of, 5 years or maybe 2 tenants, why does that matter? Finding a tenant is an aspect. It's a part of the service that we provide. It is not the whole service. And agents who haven't realize that finding a tenant, it is not 100% of the service. Many agents that I speak to are phasing out the letting service altogether. They're stopping offering that option. And landlords understand that is the reality. Unless they're full-time landlords and have time to educate themselves and sort of manage a huge portfolio of properties, then they need professional advice and support.
Greg, that's so spot on. I mean, the Australians don't even call it rental; they call it property management.
Yeah,
and the idea of just tenant find only is just ridiculous to them. And it was probably almost 10 years ago now. So when you said about predictions and recording, I could probably dig this recording out from about 10 years ago, Ollie. That we said that this industry is going to move from sales and lettings, which is how it's always been referred to property management and sales. And indeed, the sale aspect of it, from a landlord perspective, is a part of the whole property management. It's the asset management piece, and it's this joined up opportunity. It's no longer just finding a tenant and moving a tenant in. And if that was ever appropriate, which I doubt that it was, it's certainly not now.
No, and also the amount of challenge that a landlord faces, it's just not relevant to the risk they face. I mean, I would echo the thoughts of many that that's the important role letting agents play. With all of this change, with all this reform, I think it's a fair argument that you are far well ahead of this, even if you feel behind it as letting agents, far well ahead of it than the vast majority of landlords sat there managing their properties themselves after utilising your services to get on a portal. So I think some really interesting content there, guys. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to the quick fire round because I'm conscious of time, and thank you for the hundreds and hundreds that are stuck with us. I'm going to start with you, William. House prices. Do you forecast them to go up? 5% plus, stay the same, or 5% drop? Which cohort do you think they'll fall in?
I think same, as in drop less than 5%.
Okay, interesting. Greg, landlord volumes.
Landlord volumes will decrease, unfortunately, over the next 12 months. However, I see landlords entering the market again when either the interest rates drop or the legislation changes or the rents increase sufficiently to make it as profitable as it needs to be.
And Peter, management fees. Do you think agents will, we've talked a bit about maybe how and why. Do you think in the next 12 months letting agents will achieve an increase in management fees? They'll stay roughly the same? Or do we think the race to the bottom will continue somewhat and they'll decrease?
Well, I hate having creosote on my trousers, Ollie, but all three scenarios will occur. Some agents will increase, some will remain the same, and some will decrease. So the average is the same.
I think you've ducked out of that one, Peter,
right,
to be honest with you there.
So the best agents are going to increase their fees because otherwise they won't survive. Right?
Indeed.
However, I'm afraid the majority of agents will probably chase market share and will decrease. So overall, they'll decrease.
Very interesting.
Ollie, just a very quick caveat on the landlord volumes, because obviously everybody expects them to decrease. The the unlikely event, but what we could see is that if the sales market slows down, then we may see some vendors dip their toe in the lettings market, like we saw about 15 years ago or so. And that will increase supply somewhat, but the demand for properties is so high that it will not impact rent levels. That's sort of my hedge as I'm learning from Peter.
I think we're playing a fast and loose game here in terms of predicting this, because of course it's horses for courses, and depending the quality and the outlook and service level you're providing will depend how well you monetize and monopolize in the market you're working in, frankly. And I think that's the point, isn't it? That actually through this year and actually the last couple of years moving forwards, it's a market of opportunity for the very best. But I think that, for me, the message is you can't be mediocre at this and expect to really turn a living, because there's far better agents out there thinking smarter. And, I'm sure utilising the support and education pieces across the market, if you're doing that, all of our attendees today will be in that higher cohort, pushing for more and more market share and better fees, and trying to give better service to landlords. Of course, a lot is dictated by rents, William. What's your forecast from a rental perspective, a rental value perspective? Do you think they will continue to increase, carry on growing at similar rates, or do you think that will slow down somewhat?
I just think there's such an imbalance between demand and supply right now. I think they're absolutely going to continue to increase, and of course landlords are sort of just looking at extra cost, and thinking, well, I'm going to charge what I can, and they can ask for quite a significant rent increases.
And 66% of our attendees today would agree with you, William, actually, that rents will increase. I don't think that's probably sort of accurate in terms of across the panel view. Looking at management fees, this is more split. Only 32% believe that they'll increase. 63% remain the same, and 6% decrease. By more.
People weren't able to do a Peter there and tick all three boxes, were they, Ollie?
They weren't. And looking at landlord volumes, the majority, 58%, believe that landlord volumes will decrease by 5% or more, 31% remaining the same. And we have 11% of people feeling quite optimistic. And maybe that tells you, to Peter's point, how they're viewing their business and where they see opportunity, maybe. And on the final point, if my cursor will work, I can't actually get rolled up, so I'm having technical difficulties here. We go. And on the first question, house prices to either increase, remain the same, or decrease, 68% of people believe that house prices will decrease by up to 5% or more, which is quite damning, actually, when you look at the spread. For everybody attending, I hope that short session has been somewhat informative, and there's a few guides in there to looking forwards. To my fellow panelists, William, Peter, Greg, thank you so much for your input today. Thank you to all the attendees for their questions, and to everybody that's joining, happy Christmas. We're wishing you a happy Christmas and happy New Year, and we look forward to seeing you and supporting you through 2023. Thank you very much for all your time, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.